Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Now the papers are saying that the issue surrounding you is one of trust. Do you believe that as a result of what has happened in this past week or so, you have lost the trust of the British people?
No, I don't believe that. And I hope that people know me well enough and realise the type of person I am to realise that I would never do anything either to harm the country or anything proper. I never have. I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am. And I think that what I would say to you about that, and I do find it, these things difficult and upsetting, is I think there's been a desire to say right from the word go, this can't be as good as it looks. You know, they're all the same. The Tories were sleazy, Labour's no different. I don't believe we're like that at all.
That was Tony Blair in 1997 talking to the BBC. Does the message sound familiar? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Yuan Potts. Welcome to the programme.
So Yuan, back in 1997, that was a new Labour government, fresh with optimism, rocked by a scandal after it emerged it had taken a hefty donation, which might colour its judgment. A reminder that getting into number 10 isn't always the easiest path.
Yeah, fair to say. It's not been the easiest starts for the new government, with the summer riots, the poor state of the public finances and their controversial cut to pensioners' winter fuel payments. But beyond all of that, a number of other rows have also been casting a shadow over Keir Starmer and his team in recent weeks.
Yeah, Labour donors having access to Downing Street, party faithful being parachuted into civil service roles. And over the weekend, the Prime Minister came under fire for failing to declare gifts of clothes for his wife from Labour donor Wahid Ali. Starmer's also been forced to defend his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, after reports of rifts in number 10.
Yes, a load to discuss with our political editor, Alex Wickham, who's joined us in the podcast studio. Now, Alex, why is the media, the political media, so obsessed with Sue Gray? And should they be?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one we ask ourselves as journalists quite a lot over the last few weeks. I mean, I think there's several things going on here. On the one hand, in defence of Sue Gray, yeah, you know, the media likes to talk about the sort of palace intrigue and the Kremlinology of a government and a Downing Street. They like to talk about who's the power behind the throne, these sorts of mythical advisors who are pulling the strings behind the scenes, and Sue Gray is first and foremost one of those people as Chief of Staff of Downing Street. And also there's a little bit of a reality that journalists have got used to writing about scandals and gossip and all these sorts of dodgy behaviours over the last few years under successive Tory governments, and we want that sort of thing to continue to be able to write about, being perfectly honest. However, that is not to say that there isn't a story here. And the reality is, people within the Labour Party, people within the government are raising serious questions about how the government has chosen to conduct itself over its first few weeks, including the Chief of Staff, both in terms of her decision making and whether she's as good as she's sort of cracked up to be, and also on some of these ethical issues on things like donations, where by their own admission the government and Keir Starmer admit that they've made mistakes.
Well, the grumblings from people being unhappy with somebody in power making decisions isn't exactly something new, but is the suggestion really that the rifts or the unhappiness with Sue Gray are actually affecting Labour's ability to govern effectively?
There certainly are rifts behind the scenes, and some of it's about the budget coming up. There are difficult decisions to be made on the economy and public finances, public spending, and some ministers and some government officials don't want their departments to bear the brunt of it, and there's a bit of moaning going on there. And there are other people who think that Sue Gray has made a few questionable decisions early on and over the last year or so while Labour was in opposition as well, and some of those old battles that are and fault lines within the Labour Party are sort of carrying on into government. I don't think this is a major crisis for the government at this point, but there certainly is an issue on the sort of perception of the government that they're struggling a little bit with at the moment, whether it's things like winter fuel allowances that we've heard about in recent weeks for pensioners and taking that away, a controversial decision, which we've perhaps started to see eat into Keir Starmer's poll ratings, so that might suggest that there is actually a bigger picture here that Labour do need to be worried about. And a lot of that comes down to the political operation of his team, and obviously Sue Gray's in charge of that, and that's why I think quite a lot of the questions are being directed at her.
Alex, I'm interested who's doing the brief against briefing against Sue Gray. Clearly, you're not going to give us any names, but is it your sense that people have a real beef with how things are being run, or is a lot of this just an old-fashioned power struggle?
Look, there's always factions in politics, and in any country, in any period of history, leaderships are going to have different competing elements within them. So there's a bit of that going on, but also I think there is a more wider, just general unease more broadly within the Labour Party at some of the direction of the government. Again, it's not terrible disaster zone, but it's grumbling, and I think. At the end of the day, the reality is that Labour has come into power, perhaps slightly thinking, look, how the Tories did a very bad job over the last 7, 8, 9 years, particularly. They were venal, they were corrupt, they were incompetent, and we're different because we're the Labour Party and we're respectable, we have integrity, and no doubt they believe that, but perhaps that has created a little bit of a blind spot for them where they, in the first few weeks, and perhaps they are catching that now and making sure that they don't make these mistakes anymore, but that actually politics is politics, and the media is always going to find things that you would rather they didn't write about, and that is what's happening over the last few weeks. So do they need to catch themselves? Do they need to realise that you can't just swan in and go, well, we're the Labour Party, we're different, we're better, and as Tony Blair was saying in that old clip, we're not like the Tories. Well, yeah, fine, you may well believe that, but you need to convince the public of it as well. And there's just this perception issue that they're having at the moment, which could turn into a bigger thing if left undealt with.
It's worth saying as well that the Prime Minister was asked about some of these stories around Sue Gray, and he said that all he can say about it is that most of them were wildly wrong. But to that broader perception question that you're alluding to, Alex, I mean, the story over the weekend about the donations or the buying of clothes of the Prime Minister's wife, how big a problem are stories like that for the Prime Minister and for the government?
I think in the grand scheme of things, I'm sure Keir Starmer on his list of things that he's worrying about today has probably got, nuclear war with Russia at the top and questions from irritating journalists about his wife's clothes relatively low down the list. However, we've seen what happened to Boris Johnson. We've seen what happened to Rishi Sunak, and indeed years back, going back to Tony Blair, we've seen what happens when these sorts of stories do. As a one-off, they usually aren't enough to damage a politician. But if the politician allows the stories to build and allows other mistakes to creep in, and it can cause serious problems. And on the question of the clothes of his wife, the suggestion, and well, indeed they've confirmed it, is that a Labour Party donor who was given a pass to Downing Street after the election, controversial enough as it is, who Bloomberg has reported was advising Keir Starmer on public appointments, again very controversial given the fact that this man Wahid Ali was donating money to the Labour Party, has also been paying for clothes, designer, expensive clothes for Keir Starmer and his wife. These are problems that if you're a pensioner who's had your winter fuel allowance taken away, you're going to be saying, why on earth is Keir Starmer taking freebies so he can have a nice time from a guy who is also now getting access? And these are legitimate questions to ask of the Labour Party, and it is a little bit of an error of judgment on behalf of the new operation as to how they've allowed this situation to arise, especially for a politician who has run a high-risk approach of declaring himself Mr. Integrity, Mr. Rules, the guy who's supposed to be different. Whenever politicians say that, I might be a cynic, but I always think they're creating a high standard for themselves, which has a danger of going wrong.
You mentioned the polling earlier, one from More in Common just a couple of days ago showing Labour support at less than 30%, and the gap with the Tories just 4%. Are the Labour MPs you talk to anxious about the polling already, or are they mostly sanguine that things can be recovered?
Look, we're a long way from the next election. I don't think they'll be worried too much yet, but they've noticed it, and certainly, regardless of what the polls say, they've noticed their inboxes being flooded with emails from angry constituents saying, why on earth are you taking away my winter fuel allowance, and why on earth are you talking about how everything's going to be painful and terrible in Britain for years to come before we can fix it. I thought we were getting change. I thought we were getting you're going to sort out all our problems. And obviously, to be fair to the government, there are many problems, not least the public finances, that they need to address. And Keir Starmer would say, with some justification, that he needs to fix the foundations of the economy before he can start doing things that are actually, popular and that people want him to do. Yes, that's all well and good. But I think we are hearing a lot from Labour MPs that we do need a bit more of from Keir Starmer about, when things are going to change, how that change is going to happen, how people are going to feel better off in their pockets and better off in terms of the NHS being better and the myriad other problems that there are with the country. I think we might hear a little bit more of that in Keir Starmer's party conference speech next week, perhaps, because I think he hears what people are advising him on that front in his own party. So we might get a little bit more optimism and sunlit uplands. But this is a politician who is wary of over-promising and under-delivering. I think he wants to under-promise and over-deliver. And there's 5 years to go until the next election. We were speaking to Keir Starmer on the plane to Washington, and he was sort of saying, look, give me a chance. You can judge me in 5 years rather than 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks in.
But looking at the position from 5, 6, 7 weeks in and looking ahead towards the conference, as you mentioned, towards the budget, would you say on balance things are going to get better or only get worse?
Yeah, well, I think Keir Starmer would tell us things are going to get worse before they get better, and it does
sound for a catchy song title.
there's going to be tax rises in the budget, and there could be spending cuts in the budget and more borrowing, which is a put it this way, a controversial mix for anybody watching. And undoubtedly, by the end of 5 years, Keir Starmer will need to have something to show for his time in office. He can't just say, well, I got the public finances back onto a sound footing, re-elect me. He needs way more than that. And I'm sure the sort of phase 1 of the Keir Starmer premiership, perhaps a year or two, is about fixing the foundations, as he keeps saying. But I think we need to probably and will hear a little bit more about phase 2.
Yeah, plenty to look forward to for that Labour Party conference, which is coming up just, of course, at the end of this week. That's our political editor, Alex Wickham. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it does put us in an interesting position as we look at the gears shifting again for the government. We're back into parliamentary session, of course, but paused very quickly as we look ahead towards the party conferences. So a very short window for things getting done in Parliament, and then we're back to hard tax for hard brass politics in the conference season 2. So keeping us busy on all fronts. Alex, thank you very much. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe, give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Walcock and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamachia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.